Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to look at what are constitutional and human rights. Okay, so that is the chapter 2 of our constitution, as well as then how to be a responsible citizen. Okay, so in the constitution, what we have is the laws of the land. Okay, so when they were designed, they were written to fix some of the things that happened in the past. So issues of a lack of democracy, an unequal society, an unfair society, um, previously disadvantaged. Everything was written with the aim of fixing what happened in the past. That's just the first step. So when we look at the Constitution, the beginning of it has an introduction, and the introduction, we call it a preamble. Okay, so in that introduction, what's happening is it explains what this law or document is about, what is its purpose, what are the aims, and what are the justifications. So when it was put to pass, the Constitution was put to pass in 1996. Okay, so it was a long process of it being written, where a lot of people came in and were involved in designing and deciding what they want in it. Okay, so the first part of the preamble, it says, the Constitution aims to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. So that's already the first aim. So we see that the role of the Constitution is to fix things of the past. It acknowledges that there are things in our society that we're not happy with, things in our society that are not perfect, things in our society that will need to be redressed. So the Constitution says it aims to deal with that. Then the next thing it says it does, it wants to lay the foundations of a democratic and open society where the government is based on the will of the people and every citizen is equal. Okay, so what does that then tell us? That tells us that the Constitution is only going to work if people participate. Because a democracy is based on you and I voting, or well, some of you haven't voted, it's coming soon. So when you vote, you are practicing your rights as a citizen in a democratic country to say, this is who I want to see govern me. And the Constitution is based on that. So if the people in the society don't participate, then the Constitution cannot force change. Like we can't say, yo, we're so unhappy with how things are so slow in changing, like people are still living in shacks. Well, the truth is, the Constitution can't do anything about it. The Constitution says you and I have the power to vote someone else in. You and I have the power to hold someone accountable. And if we don't do it, the Constitution can't do it on our behalf. Okay. Then the next part, it says the Constitution aims to improve the quality of life of all its citizens and free the potential of each person. So again, the aim is to improve lives. It's not about maintaining lives. It's not keeping them where they are. It's an acknowledgement that there's a lot that needs to be improved. And then the fourth part of the preamble says to build a united and democratic South Africa. And take its place as a sovereign state. Okay, so a sovereign state, hopefully they've taught you in the past, but the idea is you run your own country by your own laws. You stand for yourself. You're not being puppet mastered by some weird country in another place. Okay, so we are a sovereign state. We run our own country. So South Africa's apartheid history is the reason why the Constitution was designed the way it is, where it wants to prioritize particular pillars. And what are these pillars? It's equality, social justice, and freedom. when we as citizens are being asked to step up, it's because we have to look at those three pillars and say, is our government protecting the equality of all people? Is our government implementing social justice? Is our government protecting our freedoms? And if it's not doing those things, who's supposed to hold it accountable? It's you and I again. It's not someone else. It's not another country. It's not being punished by, the gods in the air. When you're in a democratic society, the people who run the country are the people. That's even what democracy stands for. Demo, which means the people, and then Cressy is like a French, not French, but it's like a Greek statement of govern. So the people must govern. That's what a democracy is all about. So I'm going to try to see if this video will work. Otherwise, if it doesn't, I'm going to explain what's in the video. And on Edmodo, I've put a playlist together where in the first half of it, it will explain what is the Constitution, why are they human rights, and what are the human rights based on. Okay, so let's see if the sound will work perfectly.
To use our democratic institutions appropriately, we need to understand their mandate and how they function. This video provides a historical look at the Bill of Rights, which is Chapter 2 of the Constitution. Signed into law in 1996, the Constitution marked the end of apartheid and legally put into place many of the human rights that were systematically violated in the past. What was the status of these rights under apartheid? Apartheid laws and policies discriminated against people of color in every area of life. Unequal treatment with regard to socio-economic and cultural rights such as housing, healthcare, and education, for example, were routine. Civil and political rights, like the freedom of expression, were also severely limited. Public amenities like beaches, hotels, restaurants, and even toilets were segregated. A university education, good jobs, or participation in national sports teams were out of reach for the majority. Apartheid pass laws required people of color to carry a pass to enter areas reserved for white people. Under these laws, many people were evicted, moved far away from cities and work opportunities, and had their homes destroyed. One example is an inner city area in Cape Town, District 6, from which over 60,000 people were forcibly removed from the late 1960s onwards. People of color that arrived from the rural areas to find work were never allowed to settle close to the cities. Apartheid policies are one of the reasons why today millions of people still live in inadequate housing or are homeless. White people also had much better access to healthcare services. The majority of resources were allocated to whites-only facilities, while services for people of color were severely underfunded, resulting in a lack of facilities and overcrowded clinics and hospitals. The private healthcare sector employed the majority of medical professionals, but almost exclusively served the white minority. Under apartheid policies, schooling for Black people was deliberately inadequate and provided very few opportunities to study further. Education facilities were racially separated under the Bantu Education Act of 1953. The government spent substantially less money on Black schools, which lacked basic facilities like running water or electricity. As a result, the Afrikaans Medium Decree Act of 1974 enforced Afrikaans as an additional compulsory language of instruction in Black schools. This was one of the factors that led to the Soweto uprising in 1976, where hundreds of children were killed by the apartheid police. The 1979 Education and Training Act repealed Bantu education and allowed the use of native tongue education up to 4th grade, as well as limited attendance of Black pupils at private schools. The new act still continued with a system of racial segregation. Only with the introduction of the interim constitution in 1994 did racial segregation become unconstitutional, and the 1996 South African Schools Act replaced the Education and Training Act. Over 20 different apartheid-era laws also prohibited people who were labeled communist or subversive, like Nelson Mandela or Albert Luthuli, from speaking in public, being quoted in newspapers or on radio. From 1950 to 1990, over 2,000 people who opposed the policy of apartheid were banned. Many political and civil organizations, like the ANC, were banned, and thousands of books, newspapers, movies, and plays were prohibited or censored. The press and journalists were tightly controlled and forced to self-censor. Furthermore, government officials could easily ban public gatherings except religious or sporting events. The magistrate had to grant permissions to gather before people could assemble and protest. Summary: the Constitution marks the end of apartheid and the beginning of the new democratic dispensation. In order to ensure that the horrors of the apartheid era are never repeated, it protects a wide range of human rights. The Constitution also provides a legal framework for South Africa's development as a constitutional democracy based on the principles of equality, social justice, and freedom.
Good. So, when we look at the Constitution, that video was just explaining how the country was without a constitution that was democratic. In that, it was making sure that certain people could not do anything that would oppose the government. So now when the constitution comes to existence, it's meant to be the bigger boss. So it's almost like a constitution is the Bible of the country. So whenever a law is being decided, whenever anything is being decided, no one's asking, I wonder if the president will be fine. We all have to say, is this constitutional? And that is an important thing. So what then does our constitution say in the human rights part? So our human rights are meant to be inalienable. So that word, what does it mean? It means that our rights can never be taken away from us as humans, okay? So unless as a human being you become like Angazi, a zombie or something like that, you actually cannot have your human rights taken away from you. While, for instance, in dictatorships, in countries where democracy doesn't exist, it's very possible for your basic human rights to be taken away from you at any moment that the president decides it, okay? Then the other next thing about our human rights is they are interdependent with each other. So what does that mean? It means the rights are written in such a way that they're so linked that one can't exist without the other. The one can't be more important than the other. And that helps keep society accountable, that we can't deny you some of your human rights and give you others. And then the last big thing about the human rights is that it's all about equality and non-discrimination, all right? And what does that even mean? That just means that as a country, being a non-discriminatory country and pushing for equality is the most important thing. All people must be equal under the law. No one must be discriminated against, no matter what your characteristics are. And all of that is based on the history our country has had. Okay. So our human rights, we could say they're divided into like four core things. The first thing is they're divided into basic rights. So everyone has the right to equality, right to life, right to dignity, and there are other rights. So on Edmodo, I've posted the Bill of Rights from the Constitution. So you can read through all of that, especially when you work on your assignment, where you have to check in terms of protests and in terms of gender-based violence, what are the human rights that those two things are taking away from people or are violating? So the first grouping are basic rights. The second grouping are civil rights, okay? So that's stuff like my right to religion, my right to believe anything I want. So you have a right to believe the world is flat. So the cool thing about like rights is that you don't get to call what you believe in as a fact. That's why I'm allowed to believe in something that you don't believe in, but you can't tell me that I have no right to believe that because it's my right. You can tell me that what I believe in is dumb, or you can tell me what I believe in is not true, but you can't tell me that I have no right to believe what I believe, or that I have no right to have an opinion I have. While we know in the past these were big things. And the next big freedom is the freedom of expression. In the end of that previous video, they spoke about how they banned political speech, they banned political gatherings, they put people into exile, they blocked anything that could comment about the situation we're in. Most countries use freedom of expression against its own people. So they use it to, they will take your right to say whatever you want away, because often that's when you'll speak against your country. Okay, so that's why for South Africa, it's part of our basic human rights that you cannot take away my right to free speech. Then political rights, which exist on our human rights, stuff like everyone has a right to vote if you're old enough. We all now have a right to have an assembly and to protest, while in the past this was taken away from people. You have a right to start any political party, to have any political campaign. Um, Everyone in South Africa has a right to do that. And then the last grouping of rights is socio-economic rights, okay? So that's the right to adequate housing, right to access to healthcare, a right to education. Now, in most countries with very mature democracies, they don't promise these rights as a human right. And probably the reason other countries don't do it is it's a very big promise to make. It's actually quite an expensive promise. And in South Africa's case, if you look at our history, there are so many people who don't have proper housing. But the reason it's written as a right, not a privilege, is that uh, our history forced people to have to live that way. You know, in other countries, people have the privilege to say, I want to live in a rural area where I have just the basics. But in South Africa, people were forced there through homelands, and those places were never developed. An interesting thing, if you would go overseas right now, in some countries, what they call a village, you would call suburbs. Because if any country would have been given the right to develop at its own pace, um, even our villages would be quite cool, would be technologically strong. It would just mean that you live far from the city. So maybe it's a slower pace. It's, it's friendly to raise your children there. But none of us living in the cities would think, yo, mina ngifuna ukuyohlala emapulazini and grow up there. It's not a choice we have because of the way development has happened. Okay, so to just summarize that part, what has the government promised? It's promised that it will promote, protect, and fulfill the Bill of Rights. Okay. And that is a big thing because that means that the government, if it doesn't do those things, we must hold them accountable. If the government doesn't protect people's human rights, we must hold them accountable. Um, and how does that work? That's the part where you and I come in as responsible citizens. Okay. Um, a responsible citizen does the following things. First of all, a responsible citizen is aware of people's human rights, protects human rights, and promotes people's human rights. That's the first big thing about being a normal citizen. So it's not even about how we often see ourselves in society, where we easily put people down, where we easily only care about ourselves, where we easily look the other way when we see people's rights are being infringed on. Being a responsible citizen starts that way. It starts also in being concerned about your neighbor, about the welfare of the people next to you, the welfare of the poor, or the welfare of people in your community who aren't doing as well as you. And we participate in things that are going against people's human rights. So we fight for people. Some of us have more things to give. Some of us have more things to share. Some of us have more power. And being a responsible citizen is to use that. And then things like voting, actually being a responsible citizen, as much as you have a right to not vote, if we want to be responsible, we should vote. Um, we should be paying our taxes, because the things we have, would not have them if people were not paying tax. The roads you drive on, the hospitals that exist, the services like the police, like traffic cops, like government schools, all those things cannot function without taxes. So being a responsible citizen is things like that, and also being active in society. I wrote a quote there, and it says, democracies are only as strong as the citizens' level of participation. Okay, and what does that mean? That means if you and I don't do anything, if you and I sit back and say, let government ends next, yeah, then it will continue to do nothing. It is a sad truth, okay? Because leaders behave that way. Until you put pressure, until you hold people accountable, no one's going to do anything, okay? So that is a thing we should think about. So how do we do that? Beyond just going on our phones and keeping up with hashtags and posting pictures on our Instagram to say, guys, please, Corona is serious, is real. We should always be looking in our community and saying, okay, what are the organizations that are working on protecting my human rights and the human rights of others? Let me find out what are the things they're doing that I could participate in. Because active community movements are based on people like you and I who have capabilities just doing more. So things like, what are the campaigns in your area? What events are being organized for awareness? What are the projects people are doing that I could jump into? What project could I do and participate in? So you will see on Edmodo, I would have posted a video of this guy. He's wearing a shirt that says end something. And he's just making a joke about how we're so quickly to just write online and call people out and attack people for being stupid or being ignorant, but we don't do things that are more active in our lives. And we must be careful of that, because we are the generation, well, you guys are even more the generation of the hashtags and social media, which can make you guys quite lazy to do things in the community. You feel like if you took that nice photo, it was enough, and change your profile picture and put on the pink bow for cancer, you've done enough. And that's often not how things will change. So here are some basic ideas, and I've already shared some of them, and we're going to quickly look at a video of a group called Section 27. they are doing incredible work in our community. So they work in Limpopo, they work in Eastern Cape, they work in far-reaching places and look at what are government doing wrong. So what are the human rights violations in terms of health, education, community, municipalities and things like that, and going to court, running movements, challenging people. So I don't know if you guys have heard of Michael Guamape. So it was a young boy, I think he was 5 years old. He fell into a pit latrine, for instance. And then government didn't want to pay even for like the funeral, and didn't want to pay compensation to the family in apologies and in acknowledgement that they should not have unsafe toilets in their schools. And for about 5 years, Section 27 was helping the family take the government to court. And only recently did the government have to pay, I think it was close to like R1 million that the courts told them they have to do. So that is almost the thing that would show us how we can be responsible citizens, is helping people like Section 27 and being active in our societies. So if we will look at it, let's just change the slides. Here we go. Good. Here's a video. Hopefully the sound will work.
Years, I'm from Makawani High School in Limpopo. I want to study veterinarian. That's because I want to have an education. I'm also trying to get to university. But when I can't put here much, he still puts here at 16. Because much of them currently are still in school. Anything to remember, we still just with I need to make grade 8 again. I prefer grade 9 university tsa ha ke dira grade 10 ke that time ke yona e mo botsha ka ba I still like like didn't to para say like this year ang trauma mo like ya ba ka mo so wa kuthoma batswadi ba rona ba thoma ba iphitlhele gore bana ba rona ga ba safe so ba desire go thata ko like the residential board more ka mangele like I get it fast mas is not trauma like this when I was been sorry can just kilo achava like it was for me to later when I was going to get the for the filter how not I told my husband I was going to see for my when I'm going to let in the my people I prefer to my town. But department to have an Atala because we are always is about the moody so it's going to have an cave carrying our future. Let's go to the veterinarian because the Islamics.
And what I want to come back with is the answer to the question: what would you do if you ran an NGO in that community? So if in your community, the things that were going on for you were things like lack of schooling facilities that are proper, if it was things like having to outside in a classroom, but your class is within a under a tree. In Petronella's case, they literally were out of classes. And what you do about it? So what would you, if you ran the NGO, need? What rights do you think are being violated in that community? Who's at fault for the violation of those human rights? And what manpower would you need? Okay, so you're going to do that between now and 11.